Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Copilot Learning Hub. All right, big topic, data, right? Without good data, you don't have good AI. We all know this. But what are we actually doing about it? It turns out you can use Copilot to organize your data. That's meta. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. One of the things that I have found to be very fascinating is the Copilot in Data family of tools. It can be a little confusing because there's so many aspects and angles to it. So we decided to do a multi-part series, okay? It's gonna be a 5-part series on this, where we're gonna visit Azure Data Factory and then Azure Data Science and Azure Data Engineering. So first up, we're gonna start with Azure Data Factory, and joining us today is Someleze Diko from South Africa. Hi, Someleze. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey Donna, thank you so much for having me.
Of course.
Hey everyone, my name is Someleze Diko and I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft in the data advocacy team, here to talk to you about everything Copilot for Azure Data Factory.
That is awesome. Okay, so first of all, what is Azure Data Factory for those who may not be the most familiar?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question, Donna. So with Azure Data Factory, it actually allows you to ingest, clean, and transform your data within Microsoft Fabric so that you can be able to prepare it for an example, if you want to train machine learning models on it, or you want to actually build visualizations on it. So you can use Data Factory to allow you to do any kinds of transformations. Like for an example, if you want to remove any empty rows within your data set, or if you want to actually add new rows and do calculations, you can use Data Factory to do that.
Okay, so it is the tool to do the thing we tell everyone to do, which is before you can do AI, you have to get your data in order. And Azure Data Factory is the thing you use to get your data in order.
Yeah,
Perfect.
pretty much.
Okay, I hope you all paying attention because I'm extremely interested in what Someleze is going to show us. So, given that this is a 2-parter, what are you going to show us in this part 1?
Yeah. So for part 1, what we're going to do is to actually show you how you can add steps to existing queries within a Dataflow Gen2 within Data Factory, so that you can be able to do all of those transformations that I was mentioning earlier on, whether you're removing empty rows, whether you're adding new columns or doing any calculations. And then from there, we'll continue adding those steps onto the existing queries. But also, one key part of that is to actually add new data from your data source, whether it's a CSV file or an Azure SQL database. I'll also show you that on how you can actually achieve that within Data Factory.
Okay, that's a really powerful tool. I love that. All right, show us. I want to know everything.
Yeah, for sure. So on the screen right now, you're seeing what we call a Dataflow Gen2, where you're able to use it within Data Factory to ingest your data, do your transformations. And what I already have here on the screen is some of the tables that are already ingested.
Okay.
I have 5 tables. We have like a scenario that's going on with Josh and I, where we're trying to actually look at the revenue generated based on different requirements and different factors. So we have a sales table, we have a dimension customer, and this data set, as we have structured it with Josh, is following what we call a star schema, where you have 5 dimension tables, like a star basically, and then in the middle you have a fact table that actually has relations to all of those 5 dimension tables that you can be able to do. So I already have my data inside of my Dataflow Gen2, but if you're asking yourself on how you can be able to get your data inside of the data flow, you can just go ahead and select the Get Data option. And then it's going to give you a few options that you can be able to use to get your data from your data sources. So currently what you see on the screen is the different data sources that are available, but there are more data sources that you can be able to use to get your data inside a Dataflow Gen2, like your Azure SQL database, like I mentioned. But for us today, I'm just going to choose a text or CSV file, and you will have like the option to either provide a file path or URL. For an example, if your file is stored in your OneDrive, or in our case, we'll upload it from our personal PC. So I'm going to select Browse here.
Perfect.
And then I'm going to choose human resources because that's the table that's not there. Everything else is inside.
Mhm.
And I'm going to select open. So this will then upload the file. And what this Dataflow Gen2 will do once it's done uploading the file, and as I'm going to select next, it'll give me like a preview of what the data actually looks like. So that will give us like an idea what kind of transformations, what kind of steps that we need, that we may need in our query. So you can see the preview right now. Like for an example, the idea I have is to actually keep the unique value of employee key because I only want unique values of the employees within our requirements with Josh.
Right.
So once that's done, I can select create, and then this will actually create a query here called human resources on the Dataflow Gen2, and then you can be able to get started with doing your transformations, adding all of those different kinds of steps that you may need for your data flow.
I love it. Okay, so
But
just so you know,
yeah,
this is such a common scenario. And I love seeing that you're doing this with something that is so common to everyone because, I run a fashion company. How I look at my sales data in a CSV. And looking at it in a CSV is the most overwhelming activity that one could do because you're like, oh, there's a lot of information. Then I'm doing, the sketchy sorting and filtering and trying to make sense of it. But I love that you can upload something so basic like CSV off of the OneDrive or the machine you've got running in your shop, and now you can do a lot of transformation cleaning, et cetera, et cetera. I love that it's not some very complicated thing that you need to start with to even arrive at something where you can get insights. So this is great. Thank you for showing it.
yeah, definitely. And also, as you have mentioned with CSV, it may not be easy to actually read the data in a CSV format. And when you actually upload the file onto the Dataflow Gen2, there's a few steps that are being applied on the right-hand side of the screen there where it actually gets the data from the source and then it promotes the first row of your data to actual headers. So for an example, I have employee key, department ID, and so forth. And then based on the data that's being stored inside of those columns, it'll actually change the column type. So for an example, if in your CSV, it's storing them as a string, it will then change the column type to be an integer, for an example, if it needs to make that if it needs to make that change within your data set.
That's smart. I like that. Okay.
Yeah. So today, we're not going to be doing the steps alone. We have a friend called Copilot,
Yay.
and how we can be able to get Copilot within a Dataflow Gen2 using Data Factory is that we'll see a Copilot icon on the navigation menu at the top, and you can just select it, and it'll just give you a greeting and then give you a few suggestions of the things that the Copilot can be able to do. Like for an example, it can create a new query that references an existing query or includes sample data. It can add a step to an existing query, which is something that we're about to look at. And then it can describe an existing query or steps.
I love this
Now,
because all the times I've inherited a query from someone else. From your team, by the way, Someleze, run this query, Dona, and modify it. I'm like, what does this query mean? It's like inheriting code written in some foreign language that you've never seen before. So I appreciate the second one, or the third one. Explain me this, please, and then help me modify it. So this is awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And let's actually look at that. So what I'm going to do, because I want to do a few steps onto the sales query that we have on the screen. So I'm going to select it. So another thing with using Copilot for Data Factory is that you have to select the query that you want to add new steps on or create a new query based off. So I have to add it, I have to select it, and I can see like a preview of the data. And for an example, what's happening here is that we have order quantity, unit price, and unit price discount, and we're not really seeing anything that has to do with like gross revenue, like the actual value of the unit price discount, or even the net revenue after calculating that unit price discount value. So we're about to do that with Copilot, of course, but the first thing that we're gonna do, just like Donna had said, we're just gonna run a quick prompt where we actually say, hey, describe this query. And what I've noticed with Copilot here as it's working is that it'll describe the query based on the applied steps on the query. So for an example, you can see here, it gives me an explanation. It says, here's an explanation for the sales query. It retrieves the CSV data, it promotes headers and changes the column data types, and then it just lists it down on bullet points. What you see on Copilot is actually those applied steps. So if you didn't understand what it was doing, if you were getting started with Data Factory and you were using your Dataflow Gen2 and you didn't understand what the steps meant, you could use Copilot to actually give you an understanding on, okay, this is what's going on right now.
I love that. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's actually get into what we want to do in adding steps onto the sales query, for an example. So the idea behind this is to actually get a gross revenue column where we can calculate the gross revenue based on the sales, based on the unit price and the order quantity. So what I'm going to do is to actually quickly grab a prompt that I already prepared beforehand, and then I'm going to put it here. And this prompt actually says, add a column, gross revenue, being very specific, that is a product of unit price and order quantity, and the result is rounded to 2 decimal places. The reason why the prompt looks like this is because the unit price currently in our data set is actually rounded off to 3 decimal places. So if I want to make it prettier, I can actually ask Copilot to do so for me. So I'm going to ask Copilot to do that. And as it's doing that, it will actually add a gross revenue column based on the calculation that I actually gave it on the words, because I just said that column is a product of unit price and order quantity. I didn't have to write the actual formula myself, and Copilot actually added it in. As you can see here on the screen, I'm just going to quickly expand that. And it gives us the gross revenue. So that's the first step that we've actually added onto the existing query called sales. Right. So the next thing, now we have gross revenue, is I'm not too comfortable enough to actually just have the unit price discount being the percentage value, for an example, or a decimal. I actually want to see the actual value, the actual dollars of that unit price discount that we're giving customers. So how we can do this in a similar fashion as how we've done it for the gross revenue column, will add another prompt that actually says, hey, can you add a column called discount value that is also a product of gross revenue and unit price discount? And again, round it off to 2 decimal places. And this is one of the few tips that I would give you when you're using Copilot within Data Factory, is that try to be very specific. Actually, for any Copilot, try to be very specific on what you're trying to do so that you can get your desired outcome. So for me, as I'm getting this discount value column, I know it's going to be rounded off to 2 decimal places as I want it. So now I can be able to use this column later as I'm building visualizations and say, hey, in our company with Josh, fictitious company, this is how much we've spent in giving people discounts. Should we continue doing this or should we not continue doing this, and so forth? Then we're going to add another step. We're going to add another step now. Since we already have gross revenue and a discount value, we're going to look at the net revenue. And the net revenue in this case, I don't know if, Dona, you want to try this out, but the net revenue is not necessarily a product of any of the other columns, but it's something else. So do you want to give it a shot, Dona, and actually give us a prompt to add that column?
Yes. So why don't we say add column for net revenue? Okay, what did you do? How would we say it?
Add column
for net revenue. That gives you, well, it's natural language, so it should kind of know what net revenue is, right? You think?
We can try that.
Let's try it. I don't know.
We can try it.
Let's try it.
So let's try that. Add a column for net revenue. And then we're going to see what Copilot will do. And what you see now, it actually adds the column called net revenue.
Yes, it did.
And what you can see here, it gives you a few details. See, Dona's prompt actually works well. It actually shows what it did. It used one of the functions within the formulas that you may use within the Power Query for Dataflow Gen2, and it subtracted values, which is the discount value, or the gross revenue minus the discount value, and it gives you that value.
Okay, look at
And
me,
then
Azure Data
now,
co-piloting. I like this. That's pretty
yeah,
cool. Mm-hmm.
yeah. And now, one thing that is also that you can be able to note, Donna, with this is that as it gives you this column, it doesn't really give you the most great, well, it gives you a great result, but it's not 100% perfect since our prompt is not that specific. So you can see now the data type that's here is actually saying it's either an ABC or text, or is it a number
Right.
that is being stored here. So it's the data flows is still a little bit confused. This is where the saying that it's Copilot, not autopilot, comes into play, because you have the control to actually say, okay, I have the values. I can vet it and say, okay, this is a difference between the gross revenue and the discount value.
Right.
But now I can change the column type because that's not the column type that I want. So how do I do this? You right click on the column that you want to change the column type for, the data type for. You will see a list of options and you go to change type. When you change type, you can choose the desired one. So in our case for net revenue, it's going to be decimal number, because obviously we're dealing with a monetary value. Right. So that's cool. Now there's an additional step that Josh and I tried to work on with this, on looking at the revenue generated. What impact does it get from, let's say, for an example, the amount of days it took to ship that specific product? Are people buying products that take less time to ship more than they are buying products that take more time to actually ship? So in this case, we're going to use another prompt that actually tries to store the value for days to ship or average days to ship. So I'm just going to quickly put that prompt here. Again, still the same process, same step. Add a column, days to ship. That is a difference between ship date and order date. And the result is a whole number. Again, just being more specific in this case. And then I'm going to ask Copilot to do that for us. And this column would come into play as we're doing visualizations, where we are able to actually say, okay, when we look at the relationship between days to ship and the revenue generated, do we have more revenue from orders that are actually having products that are shipped in a less amount of time compared to ones that are shipped in a more amount of time? So we've added another step, and we've actually completed some of the steps that we would actually use within the sales table. Now, Donna, one other thing that I want us to do is to actually, when you're generating, when you're using your data and you actually thinking about how you would use this data in a later step, because right now we're just ingesting it, adding more steps. The idea now is to actually think ahead and say, okay, what kind of visualizations am I going to build at a later step as I'm ingesting it and as I'm transforming this data? And what kind of story am I going to tell with those dashboards and reports? And that's the reason why you're finding that we're creating all of those columns for net revenue and gross revenue. The next thing that we want to do is to actually have a separate query that will allow us to be able to either keep unique values of the store, because in our data set, we have a column called store name, and in the sales table or sales query, that's been duplicated. So if in a case where we're trying to look at the revenue generated by each store or how much money are we making from each store, if it's duplicated, it may not give us accurate representation of what's happening on the ground. So to do that, we would need to create a new query.
Let's pause real quick, because what I want to do is take a pause, give the audience a chance to process, because we've spent some time prepping our data. Now we're going to transition to a different episode, okay, where we're going to make a new query, and then magic will happen. Okay, everyone stay tuned.